Washington Metropolitan High School, Ballew's Day, Roosevelt's Day, Ballew High School, Luke C. Moore High School, Anacostia High School. All 6 of these schools are high schools in Washington, D.C. They all have graduation rates of 50% or lower. They also all have demographic breakdowns of 81 to 100% black students. In Washington, D.C., what some refer to as the Achievement Gap, which is any way in which white students outperform black or brown students, is seen through a plethora of disparities. One of the most evident of these is seen in high school graduation rates. In D.C., the average graduation rate for white students is 90%, while the average rate for black and brown students is 68%. That 22-point disparity, due to 100 different factors, is unfortunately not unique to D.C. Disparities in high school graduation rates across the country are blaringly unequal between white and black and brown students. To investigate some factors causing or perpetuating this gap, we caught up with Miss Borden, an 8th grade language arts teacher in Prince William County. While Miss Borden doesn't work in a high school or in D.C., her experiences paint a picture of a couple of factors attributing to the graduation gap.
To put it in perspective, in the eastern side of the county where I teach, the population of students I teach is about 85% black and brown students, whereas on the west side of the county, it's the opposite. It's 85% white students. So as far as like teachers, typically on the west side of the county, you have your range of staff for special education, for ESOL resources. Obviously, they don't need as many in the western side of the county, but they're plenty staffed. There's instructional coaches, so those are people that actually come into the school and help teachers like map out the curriculum for the year. They have admin support. A lot of schools on the western side of the county are like IB certified, so they have additional resources in that realm. Whereas on the eastern side of the county, since we do need more ESOL support, more special education support, and like for the 8th grade where I teach, we have 1 ESOL teacher and we have 1 special education teacher. So those 2 people having to split their time between all content areas to make sure that like each child gets their minutes is incredibly difficult, especially on top of all the paperwork or like additional duties that they have in those areas.
Essentially, for Miss Borden, the differences between the east and west sides mirrored those between majority black and brown schools and majority white schools in D.C. One big factor impacting student achievement at all levels is access to resources. In many areas, there are huge differences in resources in schools. This is because schools are funded by property taxes. This means that students who go to school in low-income areas receive less funding than those in higher-income areas, despite what students actually need. To go even a step further, one thing leading to the stark differences in neighborhood characteristics ties back to what our history classes didn't teach us: laws and policies that perpetuate neighborhood segregation. One of these policies can be seen with the implementation of the GI Bill and Federal Housing Association mortgages. These subsidies were primarily given to white people rather than people of color. Due to this, many white families were able to move to the suburbs and put their children in quality neighborhood schools. This is often referred to as white flight. This process further segregated neighborhoods and took money out of neighborhoods of color, further deprecating the schools. These disparities between neighborhoods and schools paint powerful pictures in the minds of our society. They inform our cultural narratives of the students within these schools. Ms. Borden touches on this a little when asked about the power of stereotypes on her kids' actions.
I have one girl who is incredibly smart, incredibly bright, and respectful to me, and never a problem in my class, but like any conflict that she's gotten into has always ended with her fists, and like she doesn't understand that like she's already viewed in the world as being an angry black girl, and then she only sees her options as like, the only way to defend myself or the only way to stick up for myself is by using my fists, and like she doesn't have the agency to like change the narrative on like who she is, because like she's been viewed in this one way and she like doesn't see any other options.
This illustrates the power of what society tells these kids they are. These stereotypes drive their actions and values. They are constantly told that they are not worthy of academic success. This narrative then helps form what students do find worth in. As Ms. Borden noted, oftentimes this value is found in networks that the students engage with on a daily basis. Studies have shown that involvement in these negative networks often lead to student disengagement and can ultimately cultivate in student dropout. While talking to Ms. Borden, another factor discussed that leads to student disengagement was the role of parents and teachers.
I typically do not run into parents too often. So, like, some teachers would joke and say that, like, that's a plus. Like, we don't have to deal with the helicopter parents. But it also is incredibly frustrating when you have a student that has failed all the quarters and you try to reach out for parent support and you don't get it, or you can't track them down, or any number of issues. I will say that the parents that are involved are very involved, and like I enjoy all my parents, but a lot of times it's like you deal with a lot of sad situations as well.
While Ms. Borden is very actively advocating for her students and their academic success, this is not the case for many teachers. Studies have shown that many teachers have low expectations for minority students. This often yields higher rates of student disengagement and greatly impacts their levels of self-esteem. The result of all of these things is an impact on individual students within these schools. These laws, narratives, and relationships all function to tell students systematically who they are and what they are worth. The result of this process is low motivation, self-efficacy, self-esteem, apathy, disengagement. These can all coalesce into the final act of student dropout.
So, like, as I mentioned before, like, all my students are going to the NBA, all my students are going to the NFL, and it's just like, I especially try to, in the classroom, give them as many choices as possible for them to, like, explore their options, like, within that content area. So, like, a big way I do that is, like, independent projects. So, like, I had one student in particular, he's, like, a very talented basketball player, but, so I got him to read a book about basketball, and then he, like, turned it into this whole reading project, and it was a great reading project. And then, like, I made sure to, like, boast about it and put him on blast, like he was the independent reading project king, just so that, like, he could have pride in something, like, academic that he was able to produce. And, like, he's more than just a basketball player. Like, you're a student and an athlete, and you can be both of those things at one time.
There are many factors causing and perpetuating the systematic disparity between graduation rates of white students and non-white students. When thinking about all of them at once, there seems to be no hope in fixing the problem at all. The fact that this ill-structured problem is multifaceted, however, simply means that there are many points of entry on impacting the problem. One organization working towards closing the gap is doing work on the social context level. It has dedicated resources to collecting and understanding data about the graduation gap in Washington. This organization is called Raise DC. They bring together educational agencies, school teachers, and civic partners to highlight core indicators of the achievement gap at their yearly Graduation Pathways Summit. This summit functions to educate school-based leaders on how to support school success for all students.
After speaking with Ms. Borden and analyzing our resources, we have found that there are many contributing factors causing and perpetuating the racial gap in high school graduation rates in DC. The problem is big and complex, but with many people working towards change, it can be eliminated.